years. Okay. We started?
Yeah, we're already live.
Shalom. Welcome to our Shir in Tanakh, the Haftora of Parshat Vayigash, Yechezkel chapter 37, what we call the unity of the two trees. We'll soon see the Eitz Yehuda and the Eitz Ephraim. We'll explain that. But before we get into the content and the ideas of the Haftarah, how it's applicable to us today, let's first understand we're reading about Yechezkel. We mentioned just before, he began his prophecies, mamash, just a few years before the destruction of the temple. In the 5th year of the Galut of Yayachin, 6 years before the destruction of the temple. And he ends his prophecies, to what we see and understand, 16 years after the destruction of the first temple. It means most of his prophesying is happening, Aleph, after the destruction, and Bet, what we call Chutz La'aretz, outside the land of Israel. A major question that many scholars ask, if the land of Israel is the land of prophecy, the land of the divine presence, how could it be that he's a recipient of this highest connection that a Jew can reach? How can he be getting in Chutz La'aretz? Just one question raising. Another point that we should mention is that for those years of his prophecies before the Chorban HaBayit, it's obvious that a majority, that's the first 24 chapters of this Sefer. I have a summary here in front of me. Don't think I know this, all this, please. It's all part of the Dat Mikra series of the Masada of Cook. Most of his prophecies are dealing with the disasters, the terrible things that are about to come on the Jewish people. Whereas when he's a refugee living in Bavel, he's getting some good prophecies about the coming back, which is the one we're about to be reading. But the problem that we still should deal with in the prophecies of Yechezkel, how can he be turning to the people in Yerushalayim when he's sitting on the river in Babylon, Har Kabal in Babylon? Remember, he started getting prophecy when he was in Eretz Yisrael, because the Shekhinah does not apply itself to Chutz La'aretz. So there are basically two answers that we can understand, which is very important for us to understand about the great identity of our nation of Israel. We are a nation of prophets. It's something which is indicative of the inner being of the Jewish people, the inner psyche, the inner neshama, that we have this DNA that allows us to connect to God, to be a recipient of God's words. Starting from Adam Rishon to Avraham Avinu, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, and so on and so forth. And we all know the great stand at Sinai, Mamad Har Sinai, where all of the people, men, women, and children, prepare themselves as God commanded them, how to prepare psychologically, mentally, physically, to hear God's words. So maybe one answer, how can Yechezkel be getting prophecy? Well, the volume was open, the connection started here in Eretz Yisrael, and it continued as long as it started here. Another answer given by Rabbi Levi in the Kuzari, 2 words, Ba Uva'avua. I repeat, Ba, in her, in the land of Israel,
Or related.
or Uva'avura on behalf, Ba'avur on behalf of Eretz Yisrael. So that would answer how Yechezkel gets prophecy in Chutz La'aretz. That will also explain Moshe Rabbeinu. He wasn't born and bred in Tel Aviv, was he? Where did he get prophecy? Mitzrayim, Midian, go to Har Sinai. So since his prophecies are ba'avur on behalf of getting the Jewish people to the land of Israel, so that will explain even how Moshe Rabbeinu gets prophecy, even though he's outside the land of Israel. Yes, Yeshua.
According to that second answer, then why did it cease for so long and then not start again until they returned to Eretz Yisrael? Zechariah and Rafi and all of them, they are after we come back, but there's that period in between where there's no prophecy whatsoever. But they could have prophesied on behalf of Israel, they just didn't.
Okay. It seems that prophecy is a function of the Shekhinah, divine presence. And the Shekhinah is usually a function of the nation's presence in the land of prophecy. And when we're being sent out for 70 years into Bavel, so there's a tremendous qualitative loss that comes into expression, that there's less prophecy. Maybe that'll explain why those prophets are not getting these prophecies. Mr. Bradley, what do you want to ask?
Didn't Moshe travel north to what would have been Eretz Israel, although not Medina Israel, at some point? I thought before he came, after he had to leave Egypt because of
An APB on it, right?
Yeah,
Everyone's looking.
but before he
to
returned,
kill
wasn't
him.
there a period that he was living here?
Could be in the Midrash, but we only learned that he got, according to the Mikra, that he goes to Midian, and then he comes to Sinai to take care of his father-in-law's sheep. I think that'll be enough right now for a short introduction about Yechezkel the prophet, and let's go into his vision that he gets here on behalf of the Jewish people. Again, we are in Yechezkel Lamed Zayin. Does everyone have the place? And I think we'll all see clearly why our sages chose this chapter, or this segment of the chapter, to be parallel to what we're learning in our Parshat Vayigash, where we're learning about the famous return of the brothers to be together. Okay, and the major subject or theme in our parsha, of course, is the unification of the family of Yaakov being unified, coming together. So often our sages took a major theme and looked for or searched for it, a parallel in the books of the prophets. And of course, in the theme in our parsha, we have two major figures, like the Rav introduced. That's what the Midrash talks about. We have in this corner, we have a super heavyweight, Yehuda. And in that corner, we have Yosef. So we have two major characters, two great members of the tribes of Israel. And Yehuda, with his great speech, of course, forced Yosef to reveal his identity. And Yosef there is acting like number two in power. He's the Mishneh LaMelech. So too now in the Haftora, we're about to read how there are two dominating tribes, and they are Yehuda and Yosef. We'll see the name Ephraim. Again, remember, Yosef is forked out to Ephraim and Menachem. We talk about two tribes. So in Haftarah, we'll see how Yehuda, Yosef, or Ephraim are being unified, and that'll be a perfect parallel to the unification of the brothers as the family of Yaakov in Mitzrayim. Let's see what God is commanding to be done. Perek Lamed Zayin. But before you read the Haftarah, I want to bring to your attention the psukim immediately preceding the Haftarah. It's obvious that Yechezkel is talking about upcoming periods of time. And as some of you know, that when we are in the Galut, we're likened to, as Yechezkel says in many places, Atzamot Yeveshot, dry bones. I'm not talking about the characters in the Jerusalem Post. We're talking here about the Jewish people. The Vilna Gaon says, based on these prophecies, that our existence, when we are in Chutz La'aretz, it's like we're living in a cemetery. It comes from the idea of the dry bones. No vitality, no essentiality, no special uniqueness. And therefore, look back in verse 11, Pasuk Yud Aleph, when Yechezkel, this previous prophecy to this, Vayomer Eli, and God said to me, Ben Adam. Ben Adam is Israel. The Gemara Masechet Yevamot sees that many places in the prophecies, the prophet is talking to a Ben Adam. So you might think on a universal level that it's any human being, but no. Ben Adam is the Ben Adam. Quote, Gemara Masechet Yevamot, Yisrael kruyim Adam, ve'enu umot olam kruyim Adam. The nation of Israel, they're the spitz, they're the spitz, they're the pinnacle of human society, and therefore they're called Ben Adam, relatively speaking, to the others that are not called Ben Adam. That's a Gemara Masechet Yevamot on these words. What does he say? Hatzamot, these bones, called Beit Yisrael, that's the house of Israel. Meaning, When the house of Israel is in the Galut, we are called Atzamot Ha'ela, as if there's no tissue, no skin, no blood circulating in the body. It's just bones. Hine Omrim, they're saying, Yafshu Atzmotenu. Our bones have dried up. V'avda tikvatenu. If we lost our hope, Nigzar Nolan has been decreed for us. So you can see that the God is saying, I understand that when the Jewish people are in the Galut and they're likened to dry bones, it's as if they have no hope, no future. They're in a state of despair, worried, and totally no hope. Lachain, therefore, in verse 12, and God says, I want you to prophesy and say to them, Ko amar Hashem Elokim. I'm reading verse 12 as a prelude to our Haftora. Hineni foteach et kivrotech. I'm going to open up your graves. Va'aleiti etchem. I'm going to bring you up. Mikivrotechem ami. I'm going to bring you up from your graves, you, my nation. Ve'veiti etchem el admat Yisrael. I'm going to bring you to the land of Israel. There is hope. There is a future. Vidatem, and as a result, I'm adding, you're going to know, Ki ani Hashem. Okay? Ki ani Hashem, that I am God.
Not
yet, just get it out. We'll start coming to get all the free juices. Okay? Everyone's going to know that I'm your God. What am I going to do? I'm going to give you my spirit. Spirit is vitality. Spirit is the ability to overcome. Spirit is hope. V'chitem, you're going to live. Real chayim. There's chayim that's not life. There are people that are alive physically, but their lives are terrible. They're miserable. I'm going to give you my spirit, and then you're going to have real chayim. I'm going to place you on your land. Vidatem, and then you'll know, Ki ani Hashem dibarti v'asiti ni'um Hashem. This is the prelude to the prophecy that we're up to right now. And now we're about to read God's design, his architectural plans for the future to bring Israel to become a united Israel. Some of you have learned Nevi'im Rishonim, the early prophets. You've learned Yeshua, Shoftim. And then you learned Sefer Shmuel. And that was a prelude to the kingdom of David, and then Shlomo Melech. And then you realized that the great days of unity, of social unity, of respect for fellow Jews, reached its height, and then we plummeted. Then we went down, and then we deserved to have our garments ripped in the prophecy of Achiyah the Shiloni from Shiloh. And there, literally, the kingdom is ripped and torn, and we now have the appearance of two kingdoms which last for hundreds of years. A devastating time, which eventually leads to the destruction of the temple. But it's clear that after the time of Shlomo, after his son Rechavam, when we started having two kingdoms, the situation was batata. You know what batata means? Some of you that your Hebrew is good. Doesn't only mean sweet potato, it means a terrible situation. Have you heard that, Shua, the term? I'm the first one. So please send news home that I taught you a new Hebrew word.
How do you spell that?
No, like you spelled batata. Betetet, which is sweet potato, but it's used as an idiom, as something negativity here in Israel. So here, instead of having two kingdoms, which eventually were exiled, Malchut Yehuda in the house of David in the south, Malchut Ephraim were the children of all the other tribes. We're about to learn about the unity in one. So let's read the content. What is God's plan? Let's raise some questions, and then maybe we might have to use some new researchers that can give us some insight how to better understand this chapter. God spoke, these is God's words to me saying, I have to say it to you, I can't close myself up, but I must tell you the prophecy. Again, we learned in the previous chapter that God's going to wake us up. There's going to be a revival. He's going to take us out of our graves. We're going to come back to Eretz Yisrael, but that's not the end of it's not the end of the show. It's not the end of. You're going to take Yemenites and Moroccans and Americans and Canadians and South Africans and Australians and all these, live them in one volatile place. How are we going to get together? How are we going to unite? So here's going to talk about the unity. Okay, let's see. Ve'ata venadam, again, the term venadam relating to Am Yisrael. Kach lecha eitz echad. I'm going to ask all of you, what does the word eitz mean?
Tree.
Tree.
I didn't ask you now. I will ask you. Uchtov alav lihuda v'livnei Yisrael chaverav. That's on one, eitz. Ulekach eitz echad, meaning another eitz. Uchtov alav liyosef eitz Ephraim v'chol beit Yisrael chaverav. 2 eitzim. Until now, there is a division. And the division is like it was during the First Temple period. From Yerushalayim, or from this area north of Yerushalayim, and going south to Beit Lechem, Gush Etzion, Hebron, we're talking about 2 major tribes, Yehuda, together with the tribe of Binyamin. And that's what happened during hundreds of years. They were united as one body almost. However, in the north, after Binyamin, going north, we have Ephraim, Menachem, the house of Yosef, we have all the other tribes. All other 10 tribes. It was 10 tribes divided from 2 tribes. 2 tribes divided from 10 tribes. So on 1 eighth, I want you to write Yehuda and Bnei Esau, which is referring to Binyamin. That's his friend. And on another eighth, write Yosef as the eighths of Ephraim and all the other tribes, meaning 10 tribes in total. What has to be done? What is the Besorah Tova? What is the great novelty here? Pasuk Yud Zayin, verse 17. V'karavotam, take them, those 2 eitzim, and bring them krovim. Make them
one together.
Krovim. Near to one another. Echad elech el echad. One should be next to the other. Lecha, for you, for the betterment of Israel. Le'etz echad, into 1 eighth. Is that what you read? Into eitz echad. You read that as well? Vayu lachadim biyadacha. I don't understand those three words. Vayu lachadim, meaning their unity will be in your hands. We have to understand that. We don't know yet what it means. Let's keep on going on. Pasuk Yud v'chasher yomru eilecha b'nei amchalim. When your people start asking you the question, Halo tagid lanu ma eilelach? What's going on with these writing on 2 eitzim? What does this plan mean? Verse Yud Tet, the reply you're going to give to the people. Verse 19. Daber aleim, speak to them. Ko amar Hashem Elokim, these are the words of God. Hineni lokech et eitz Yosef. I'm taking the eights of Yosef, Asher biyad Ephraim, which is usually in the ruling of Ephraim. V'shiftei Yisachar, and the tribes next to him, which we said are 10 tribes altogether. V'natati otam alav. Look at me. On. Alav.
On him.
Who has to be on who? Let's keep on reading. V'natati otam alav et eitz Yehuda.
It's Yehuda. Then I go 4.
I'm reading it again. V'natati otam alav et eitz Yehuda. The preposition et eitz Yehuda. Who will be on top of who?
Yehuda, on Yehuda.
So Yosef will be on top of Yehuda?
No.
Yehuda is on top of Yosef.
Let's read it again. V'natati otam alav. I'm going to put on them. On who? On eitz Yosef. Who am I going to put on? Look at the preposition. Et eitz Yehuda. The eights of Yehuda will be on.
Yosef.
Who's going to lead? Who?
Mm-hmm.
Turn to the end of the Haftora. Towards the end of the Pasuk Kaf Daled. We get meaning of this plan. Pasuk Kaf Daled, verse 24. Ve'avdi David melech aleim. You see that pasuk, gentlemen? When we learn Tanakh, we can't ignore other psukim. We have to see the entire picture. Ve'avdi David, and my servant David, which is the lineage of David, obviously. He's not alive here physically. Melech aleim. Look at the personal pronoun aleim. Aleim. Who's going to be on who?
Yehuda over Yosef.
So Yehuda will rule over Yosef. That's what it says here. V'ro'eh echad, one shepherd, yeh lechulam. Uv'mishpatai yelechu. Through my laws that shall they go. V'chukotai yishmu, my statutes they shall preserve. V'yosu etam. So we see here, in explaining the words "V'natati otam alav," that God will allow Yehuda to rule over Ephraim. Okay, and this is based upon what we see V'avdi David. Okay, let's keep on reading. Pasuk Kaf, verse 20. But it does say at the end of verse 19, they're going to turn into 1/8. Is that what it says by you as well in your Tanakh? Vasitim, you'll make them le'etz echad. Do you all read that? Read the Hebrew text, gentlemen. Don't only be a victim of the English. Read the Hebrew. Vasitim le'etz echad vayu echad biyadi. And they're going to be in my hands. Pasuk 20, vayu haitzim asher tichtov aleihem biyadcha. You're going to write, inscribe, I don't know. Lay them in front of everyone. Pasuk 21, v'daber aleihem, and speak to them. Ko amar Hashem Elokim. Hinani lokechet b'nei Yisrael. I'm going to take them. El Al 002, departing from Houston, Texas. El Al 003, leaving Milano. El Al 004, departing from Munich. El Al 005, departing from LAX.
6.
002. I thought I remembered it by heart until guys don't. Make sure I don't work in the control tower. You know, left us like a few weeks ago. We got a job offering to work in one of the airport control towers. What's his name? Daniel. He's a pilot. He's an aviation expert. Hope he doesn't get the job when he comes back. Dan, if you hear me, then I mean it. God's going to take Bnei Yisrael mi ben hagoyim asher holchu sham v'kibatzti otam misaviv. I'm going to collect them. V'veiti otam al admatam. What will be the end result? Pasuk 22. Vasiti otam legoy echad ba'aretz. Do you hear that? Goy echad ba'aretz. Did our Chazal take this term and insert it in one of our prayer services?
Yeah, I think so.
Which one?
I think it's in the Shemon Esrei.
That's right. Which one?
And
Shabbat.
Tekah v'shofar.
Yeah.
Shabbat when?
Shabbat.
Ata echad. Mincha.
Very good. Shabbat mincha.
There we go. There you go.
Ata echad, you're one.
There we go. You said we're-
V'shimcha echad, and your name is one. Ata echad. V'shimcha echad. Goy echad ba'aretz. One nation in the land. The Zohar, don't accuse me of learning Zohar. The Zohar, it's written in the Sidurim, you can see the explanation there. The Zohar says, Daika, l'dayek, to be precise. We can only be one goy, one nation, where?
In our land.
Ba'aretz, very good. Ba'aretz, nowhere else. I'm reading again, Pasuk 22. Vasiti otam legoy echad ba'aretz. B'harei Yisrael, the mountains of Israel. The predominant part where the Jewish people settled, as you may know historically, was from Beersheba in the south, going up to the Hebron mountains, Hebron, Gush Etzion, Beit Lechem, Yerushalayim, Beit El, Shiloh, Shechem, and ending Jenin, which is called Ganim, okay, which is next to the Gilboa Mountains. If anyone ever did army service in that area, so most of the Jewish people were not living on Dizengoff Square, but they were living in the mountain area. Goy echad b'aretz b'harei Yisrael, u'melech echad yeh lechulam lemelech. What will not there be anymore? Velo yu od l'shnei goy. We're not going to be like two nations. Velo yechatzu od. We're not going to be divided further. L'shtei mamlachot od. So what we're seeing here, as far as the theme of this chapter, is not just the bringing of Jews, what we call kibbutz galiyot, in gathering of the exiles from the nations abroad and bringing them to the land of Israel, but we're learning that the tribes in the future will turn into one entity, one government, one monarchy. And of course, it did not happen in the period of time that you're learning during the time of Koresh. Okay, what you're learning with Rabbi Weinstein and Sefer Ezra, in the period of Shivat Zion, the return to Zion during the times of Koresh, this did not happen. Okay,
So
a lot of
it's going
Jews.
to happen.
It will happen in the next period. That's right. A lot of Jews just couldn't leave their Persian carpets,
And they fancy that.
their Borough Park houses in Brooklyn and Flatbush and all these places. Okay, they couldn't leave it, and therefore a minority of Jews, right, made Aliyah. A majority stayed, and that said a lot of things what they were doing. You had a question?
Yeah. So obviously the only two tribes that are mentioned is like Ephraim and Yehuda.
Because those were
That's
the
the
leading
kingdom,
tribes
like Yehuda was
during
the kingdom.
the 400 years of the monarchies of Israel in Beit Rishon.
Okay, so meaning the two divided kingdoms of like Yehuda and then the rest of the tribes, now they're uniting and becoming one.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. If I ask David, make a chart for me, please, with 3 columns. 3 columns.
How many rows?
3 rows. There you go. Give him another color. Don't be Ashkenazi. Give him another color.
Something wrong with Ashkenazis?
I'll talk to you after class.
Speak with us.
When my kids want to give me comments that I'm too thrifty, they said, Abby, stop. They say, Abba, stop being so Ashkenazi. It's a common joke.
Saves money on spices.
Okay. Place of unity. We'll show everyone afterwards your talents. Place of unity.
That's right. I will hold it.
The next one, the time of unity. And the third, Mi Barosh. Who's the leader? The leader. Okay, who's the leader? You. No. Okay. Change to the color red. We're getting tough now. Parsha. And the last column to your left, the Haftora. Okay. In our Parsha, Vayigash, where's the place of unity happening?
In Egypt.
Thank you. It's right.
Oh, okay.
Hebrew. Be tough on him. Whereas, your tzaddik looks like a nice dollar, but Mem Sofit. Okay, very nice. In the Haftarah, where's the unity happening?
Exit like.
Where is the unity? We're just learning. Where is it going to happen? Eretz Yisrael. Very good. Eretz Yisrael. Very good.
Okay, never
In here.
mind. No, I was thinking of.
Okay. Next.
Jerusalem, though.
Eretz. Look at the Eretz. The time that this is happening. This is happening in our parsha. This
Famine.
unity is what?
Famine. It was during a
So
famine.
during a famine. For what objective is it happening?
To save Israel from starving.
That's one understanding.
To fulfill the second dream or the prophecy.
What else? What is God's plan that He promised and swore to Avram Avinu?
Make them
Exile.
To make them, in other words, to bring us down into exile.
Oh.
That's the purpose of unity here. So we're going to start the fulfillment of the Brit Ben Abitarim, the covenant of the pieces. Quote, chapter 16. Vayomer Hashem el Avram, Yadoa Teda, surely you know, Ki ger yezaracha, your zera will be a stranger. Be'eretz lo lahem, a land which is not theirs. Va'avadum, they'll be in servitude. Ve'inuatam, they'll be afflicted. The wheels of the galut, of the formation thereafter of what we call the Hebrew nation, will come out of that. But right now we're talking about for the making of the galut. For the making of the galut. So this unity, by definition, is a temporary or perpetual unity?
Temporary.
Very good. So it's temporary for the sake of galut. Whereas in our Haftarah, what God is prophesizing here to Yechezkel, the times of the of this ichud, of this unity, is for what time system?
eternity.
Eternity. Beautiful. What's the Hebrew word for eternity?
Leolam.
That's right. Leolam. Another word.
Uh,
Another word. Lanetzach. Lanetzach. Right? Lanetzach, for eternity. You wrote in Hebrew, Mi Barosh, in English letters. Mi Barosh. And the parsha,
Temporary Bivrit.
Zmani. Very good. It's very good. Tell me, Shua,
Yes.
the unity that's being made here,
Mhm.
it's a clear, it's temporary, it's in Mitzrayim in the parsha. And who's going to be the leader?
Rabbi, always Rabbi.
No, again, we're in the parsha. You're going to be
Parsha is Yosef.
very
Yeah.
good. It's going to be Yosef. He's going to be the leader, Yosef. Whereas in the Nevuah of Yecheskel,
It's Rabbi. It's Yehuda.
very nice. It's going to be David.
But in the parasha, it looks like that of the
1 second, Malte. And where is the eraser?
There.
Have no fear, the eraser's here. Let's get a final face of feet. Malte, what are you asking?
But in
It
the
goes, then it goes
parasha-
down. No.
I don't hear you. What?
But in the parasha, it looks like that Judah
Sorry.
was the leader of the other brothers.
That's clear. But when he gets to Goshen, who's going to be the boss?
Yosef.
Thank you. I think you answered your
It
own
looks
question.
like that,
He's representing the other
No.
brothers. He's defending them. You're absolutely right.
directly up under Yosef.
Okay. I want to read a few more psukim and then get back to this chart. This idea I saw by one of my rabbis, Rav Elchanan Samet, who's quite a Tanakh teacher. In Pasuk Kav Gimel, in 23, the fact that God's going to bring the Jewish people to the land of Israel. What will that be forsaking in Chutz La'aretz? Pasuk 23, read it with me. V'lo yitamu od b'gilulohem v'shikutzeihem uv'chol pisheihem v'oshati otam mikol mashvotechem asher chatu v'hem v'tiarti otam v'ayu li la'am v'ani eyeh lehem le'elohim. Gentlemen, in Chutz La'aretz, the availability of the spirits, the cultures, the ways of life which are so indicative of idolatry, of plurality, of liberalism, of so many different things, not going to be polluting their lives anymore.
Oh.
In Chutz La'aretz, that's what it's saying. I'm going to save you from that. In Eretz Yisrael is an Eretz of purity, an Eretz where we can clear our minds, clean our bodies, clean our ways. You'll be a healthy nation instead of being just caring for yourself. You're going to turn into a nation. In Chutz La'aretz, we're just a bunch of pratim. Okay, we're just a bunch of individuals. I know there's a congregation there, but there's really no federation. There's no national unity.
There's no Am Yisrael.
There's no nation.
Israel.
And as we saw before in verse 24, Vavdi David Melech Aleim, it's going to be David ruling over everyone, like the shir that we heard yesterday from Rabbi Gon and Mashiach ben David. Pasuk 25. V'yashavu al'aretz, you're going to dwell on the land asher natati lavdi liYaakov. Asher yashvu. Yaakov is the summary of the three forefathers. He sums up all the great character traits and abilities that are in his father Yitzchak and his grandfather Avraham. Asher yashvu ba'avotechem v'yashvu alehem avnei. You're going to dwell in the land, your children, uvnei v'neihem, and your grandchildren, ad olam, forever. V'David avdi, a second time. Nasi lemlom. The word nasi can mean melech. The word melech can mean nasi, like the Rabbi Gon explained yesterday. V'charati lem brit shalom. When we're living in harmony, we're living in peace, we'll be able to develop ourselves. A brit of shalom, a brit forever. Yeotam unitatim v'beitiotam. They're going to multiply, grow in number, in affluence. V'natati et migdashi b'tocham. Eventually, they're going to get a Beit HaMikdash. Coming to the end of this prophecy, the last two verses of this Haftora. Vayam mishkani alehem. My mishkan shall be on them. When there's a mishkan, that means there's going to be Shekhinah, the dwelling of the Shekhinah. There'll be a Beit HaMikdash. Things are going to work industrially, agriculturally, in various ways. When there's a Shekhinah on the Jewish people, it's like bingo. Things work. Things are successful. Okay? Any problems? You did a beautiful job. I wanted to commend you. You did a great job. Very nice. And the ending pasuk, gentlemen, the ending of the Haftora, V'yadu Goyim, Ki Ani Adonai Mekadesh et Yisrael, B'yot Migdashi B'tocham Le'olam. The impact universally on the nations of the world will be so great that the nations themselves will know that I'm the one that's sanctifying Israel. I'm behind the success of Israel. I'm behind the great attainments in all different fields. It's because God is there. And therefore, it's going to have an impact. That's exactly the divine plan. In summary, we saw here Haftarah that there'll be a chidush, a novelty of the two houses of Israel, Yehuda and Ephraim, being together, but under the kingdom of the house of David. We learned that prior to that, there's going to be a return to Eretz Yisrael. There'll be purification from sin. 5 times here in this chapter does the Navi repeat the word Le'olam, that dwelling in the land is going to be forever. There's not going to be another galut. And so too the shilton, the control of David Avdi, or the Brit Shalom that I'm making, and that the fact there's going to be a Beit HaMikdash, it's going to be Le'olam, Le'olam. Happy days will be back to the Jewish people. Remember, this Geula that we're reading about here in this chapter is, yes, an objective in and of itself. But remember, at the ending of the chapter, that this Geula serves even a higher purpose, and that is sanctifying God's name. Sanctifying God's name. When the nations of the world see that there's goodness in the world, there's a God in the world, there's a program in the world, then the world's going to become much more benevolent. The world's going to become much better. People are going to be less selfish for themselves and think about how they can contribute to a greater world after it's been desecrated with the destruction of the temple. What I want to do is get back to eights. I know Shu was very fast to the gun when he asked to translate the word eights, and I purposely stifled him because I want all of your participation in this following matter. This idea I saw by one of my Tanakh rabbis, Rav Elchanan Samet. A question, by the way, Moshe, you can honor other persons, right? You can honor people, right?
But I don't want to. I want to keep it for myself.
Okay.
As long as-
Malta.
I went to add that it's you can't not always translate in the same word. Sometimes it means piece of wood, sometimes it means a tree, sometimes it means a gallows. It's all times the same word in
Okay.
Hebrew.
So you're preceding the subject, thank you, that I want to raise right here. And let's try to treat it the following way.
האם
כן,
הרב
תודה
רוצה
רבה. כן.
מיץ?
Tizke lemitz. No one laughed at my jokes. So usually we say tizke lemitzvot. I told you. Now you got it, huh? Thank you. I heard that from Rav Mordechai Cohen, that joke. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol mibevo.
Amen.
Is this ginger? This is funny ginger.
Would you like some?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hand this out.
Sure, I never tried it.
Recite
raw.
brachot, gentlemen.
Come on.
The subject that we're talking, obviously, and David wrote it, of course, in English. We're talking here about achdut.
Baby ginger doesn't have.
Is or is not the achdut in this haftarah? Is it complete?
That is dry.
Certainly in the parsha, it's incomplete. Amen.
Amen.
Why is it incomplete in our parsha?
In our parsha, because Yosef has been in Egypt this whole time. He's clearly not Achdut. He's not with his brothers.
But now that they're coming down,
They're still not
the
together.
brothers are going to live in Goshen. Yosef's going to live in the palace, the viceroy. There's still some suspicion, as we see after Yaakov dies. The brothers are suspicious. Will he get back at us?
They fall to his feet and say they'll be his servants.
The fact that when he notified, identified himself, I'm Yosef, they couldn't even speak. They couldn't say something. This sensation is a feeling after the passing away of Yaakov. So we see at the end of the parsha, in chapter 50, the beginning of the next parsha, when the brothers of Yosef see that their father dies, they say, uh-oh. Now it might be that Yosef might hate us, and he might get revenge back at us and do evil for all the things that we did to him. So clearly, the achdut in the parsha is not complete. Is it? Do we all see that?
Yeah.
That the unity in the parsha is certainly not complete. Again, the brothers are in Goshen. Yosef's in the palace, by the way. There are some, I didn't get to say that in our shiurim this week, but there are some that say that he purposely wants it that way. So he doesn't get interrogated by who?
Pharaoh. IRS or something.
Yosef doesn't want his father to be around him too much. Do you know why?
Because Yaakov still doesn't know how Yosef got there.
It's exactly. Yosef doesn't want to cause the father so much pain by knowing, that his brother sold him. He doesn't want him to know that. So there's an idea, a plan here. Do you follow? Why they're in Goshen and we're in the palace. So it's clear that there's ichud achdut to a certain amount, but there's still the opposite of achdut. We call that pirud. Pirud. They're separated. Pirud. They're separated. Okay, as opposed to this achdut, but you explained it's temporary, it's to survive, it's to go down into the galut, right? And only will there be a geula. The big difference is we see who's managing in the parsha. It's Yosef. We're from the tribe of Judah. It'll be David. Now, we read about a symbolic writing of tribes on Eitzim. We don't often meet up with action in prophecies. In prophecies, we usually hear ideas, programs, things that will happen. But it's rare. It's many places, but it's rare that action is ordered to be done. And that's what we see here. Okay? What is the meaning of this symbolic act of writing down? It usually, obviously, is a moral. There's a lesson here that when we meet up with an action, it maybe has more power. You're involved. Maybe the nation will internalize this more when they can, this prophecy, which is not in absolute terms, but it comes down to the real life of writing things down. For us, it's like bringing things down to earth, so we can easily or less difficult to understand. That's usually the koach, the power of symbolic action in prophecies. And here, let's now generate the wonder, which I asked you a while ago. The prophet asks for the taking of how many eitzim? 2 eitzim. And to write on them what the writing should be, Yehuda and their brothers, friends, and Ephraim and their, and then what to do with those 2 eitzim?
To bring them together in your hands.
Karov zelazeh, right? You said closer to one another. Likarev zelazeh. And that lechora, we can understand the symbolic action of bringing them closer together. What is it symbolic of?
The 2 kingdoms becoming one.
2 becoming one. Even though it's going to take hundreds of years, okay? Even though in the previous hundreds of years, we were 2 separate kingdoms. But in the time of the Geula, there's going to be one unified kingdom. What is the perush of the word eitzim that upon them to be writing? I have in my Mikrot Gedolot, Aramaic translation, the Targum. No, it's not Onkelos, who did the Targum of the Chumash. It's a great scholar called Yonatan ben Uziel, a great scholar, great Tana, Yonatan ben Uziel. Here, he writes that, you know what 8 we're talking about? According to the Targum,
Staff, like Moshe's.
I'll talk about Rashi in a moment. He says we're talking about a luach, a board made out of wood. It's a luach. Okay? Take 2 luchot, take 2 boards, write on one of them Yosef and Eitz Ephraim, and all Beit Yisrael, their friends, the other tribes. And on the other board, write Yehuda and Bnei Yisrael and write on them. And then bring them closer. We're not going to ask Mr. Bradley to split this into two and show you for an example. We can all illustrate or imagine in our minds if we broke this into two boards and we brought them closer. What's the problem? Think about this illustration.
You still have two boards that are
Thank you. We see you're a mathematical expert. Thank you, David. We still have two separate boards. Even, okay, David, even if you bring them closer together,
They're not one.
they're two separate boards. They're two luchot. Okay? They remain two luchot, and there's no ichud, there's no unity in turning them into one. Therefore, the Perush here of Yonatan ben Uziel, the Targum, the translator, who writes that we're talking about a luach of eights, we have a difficulty understanding it because perhaps it doesn't reflect the message of the unity of one. Rather, they remain two. If I read Rashi, Vayula Chadim in verse 17, I want to quote Rashi to all of you. Please help me out with the Aleph, the translation, and Bet, why he's saying what he says. In 17, I'm going to make them into one in your hands. Rashi says, I'm reading in Hebrew, Ani achabrem, I will, what's lechaber? I will connect them. Ani achabrem, achaber otam, lishnei ha'etzim, of these two eitzim. We didn't say what eitz means yet. Sheyehe eitz echad biyadecha.
So it'll be one in your hand.
I want to read it again. Ani achabrem, who is Ani?
I, Hashem.
Hashem.
I'm going to connect them of these two and make them one biyadecha in your hands. One eighth in your hands. What is Rashi explaining?
Rashi explains you're connecting them.
It was pretty similar to the pasuk, so I think it's
Like
good,
them.
at least in my opinion.
Like that with the hands.
Who?
Does it maybe mean that it's in our hands to make it?
I want to read Rashi a third time. Rashi's a science. It's an amazing technique. So short, so concise, to the point. Each word is gold. Ani achabrem. I'm going to connect them. I'm going to connect these two eitzim. Shia eitz echad biyadecha. And turn it into one eighth in your hands. What is Rashi alluding to?
It's talking about a staff.
The Sanhedrin.
I'm reading a fourth time. Ani achabrem.
I will
I connect.
Meaning?
Hashem connect.
Meaning?
Hashem connect the two parts.
Meaning that nobody but Hashem can bring them together.
What is that power called?
Hashem.
A miracle.
Okay.
Yes.
Maybe the difficulty that we had with the Targum, that we're talking about luchot here, boards, and not a tree, whatever, is, hey, we're still two luchot, like you questioned 10 minutes ago. Maybe that's the reason why Rashi suggests a different understanding, that bringing the two, maybe he's talking about two tree clippings.
Where are the two groups?
And he's going to take the two miraculously and turn them into one in a miracle. That's a nice perush, isn't it?
Yes.
And maybe the message is clear that we need God's help to unify ourselves. However, we can also raise a question on this. Where does it say that there's going to be a miracle happening, bringing the unity of the Jewish people? Right? It's not so consistent with the symbolic matter that the prophets usually take as a rule, that when the prophets bring us prophecies, it's not necessarily miracles. That's point number one. Where does it say that it's going to miracle? God's going to interfere and turn two into one. Secondly, if there would be a miracle, that's what the meaning of God's prophecy is. I don't want to tell you, but me and you see this guy over here? I don't really get along with him. I don't want to sit on the same bus with him whatsoever. You're not going to force me to be unified with him, are you? Meaning, do we want? Is that our interest? Is that the message of God? that he's going to force the unity upon us? Meaning, if it's like what Rashi says, it's going to be a miracle, it's basically suggesting that it's not going to come from our ratzon, from our heart. It's not going to come from us. Rather, it's not going to be a voluntary unity. Okay? And we would think that what is the prophet advocating here? It's going to come from the hearts of the Jewish people. They're going to see the greatness of God, the what he brought us and bringing us back to the land. We see all the geopolitical events that are happening in this generation, the ones before us, that we were going to work harder to lower our selfishness and become unified. And therefore, the unity of Israel is not, you wouldn't want to think that it's dependent upon a miracle. And if that's the case, we don't see this in the prophecy. Therefore, we have a problem. So Rashi says it's a nace. I mean, it could be a tree clipping, but the tree clippings and not the boards, they're going to be turning into one. It looks like it's a problem.
It's not a problem.
We said that we would want to have our unity voluntarily brought. But if God's going to do it miraculously,
it has to be done miraculously. The end result needs to be through Hashem, but we still have to put in that initial effort.
But we don't see that in the wording of Rashi. Rashi says, I'm going to connect them.
But Rashi's going off of one pasuk. If you read the previous pasukim, it's talking about...
So but we're saying, where's the consistency? We don't understand Rashi. There's a problem in the consistency of the pasukim. We've had in our generation some great scholars that are part of researchers, investigators, and I want to share with you a modern approach to understanding this parak. It's really a novelty. It's a great chidush. And we don't see a problem here with the Lashon, and it could be this meaning. Remember, there are shivim panim laTorah. There are 70 faces to the Torah. It could be a big, wide range of understandings. There are those commentators that approach this pasuk with the understanding that the word eitz is like Chazal say, meaning we're talking about a piece of wood. A piece of wood. Okay? What they didn't perhaps suggest is that we're talking about a tree. Ilan. Okay? Like in most places in the Tanakh. So there's a great professor, Yuda Felix, if I'm not mistaken, who is one of the great Tanakh teachers of the past generation in our time. And someone before him called Rav Mordechai Alter. And they claim that this symbolic action here in the book of Yechezkel is talking about what we know today in agriculture as the agricultural act of grafting. The agricultural act of grafting.
Which means it has to be Hashem because we're not allowed to graft.
1 second, we'll get to that. Very nice.
Oh, and the non-Jews can graft. That's
1 second, 1 second, 1 second. We're talking about a symbolic action. The action of grafting looks to us as a miracle. Whoever doesn't understand how it works, most of us are not farmers, but city boys. Okay? But the truth of the matter is, it's not a miracle. Many farmers over the century are planting trees, and they're grafting other trees onto it, either to bring strength from a strong tree to their weak tree, or to give a certain sweetness of a fruit of their trees onto their trees. And it's simply implanting one branch onto another. Just like in the medical world, we do transplanting of taking one limb and putting it from one person into another person, so too agriculturally are we doing the same thing with trees. Okay, so let's say we take two trees. One is called the Mr. Wiederman, your turn. I want you to write 3 words on the board over here.
But if we have this way,
Well, let me get to explain everything they want to hear. I want you to write the word, the base tree is called the kaneh.
Where?
Over here. Kaf nun hey. The kaneh, there's a pasuk in Tehillim 80. The kaneh asher nata yeminech. The base tree that you want to strengthen or sweeten, okay, that is called the kanah. The kanah. No, with the kaf, I'm sorry. Kaf. There you go. And two oars. Kanah. From the word ken. Ken is a base. The base of the menorah is called a kan. I'm sorry, kan. Kan is the base. The tree upon which it'll be grafted is the kana. It's the base. Okay? The grafting from another tree is called the rochev, the rider. You're taking it, it's riding on the tree. So call it rochev, a rider. We meet up with the word rider in the splitting of the seed. Remember? The riding on top of the horse. The riders on the horses. Reish, Vav, Kaf, Vet. That's the grafter. We're grafting from a tree on to the base. Okay? Let's just take, you're a farmer, right? Yep. And so we're going to cut a branch of the bottom branch of a tree, and we're going to put it on the kana. Is that clear to us? We're going to take the rochev from another tree and attach it, and we'll take some elastic or some bandage or something, and we will tie them together, right? In the beginning, for a year or two, or whatever, it's clear. What do we notice? Two separate branches. It's obvious for a certain period of time when the grafting is done, it's two separate things. We see one is thinner, the other is thicker. But with years passing, we don't notice anything whatsoever. And many people, when they plant groves of trees, they take it from these grafted trees because they're looking for nicer trees, stronger trees, and sweeter trees. And therefore, they do these things. We have agricultural schools here in Israel. And I remember of Mordechai Eliyahu, Zatzal, the volcanic school, I forget what it's called, up north. He told them, I want you to create the ideal etrog by taking different zanim, different types of etrogim. One is stronger, one becomes more yellow, one becomes a greater size, one has a beautiful structure. So he ordered, he sat with the what are they called?
Agricultural people?
Not agronomists, what are they?
Agriculturalist?
Agronomist, they're called in English?
Ecologist?
No, he sat with the agronomist and he told them what he's looking for, and they started grafting different types of etrogim in order to produce what Rabbi Eliyahu Zatzal thought would be the ideal matters. I'm not going to get now into the famous halachic debate that happened during Rav Kook's time about what's called an etrog murkav, a grafted etrog. There, the fear would be that they're going to take a lemon and graft it onto the etrog. I'm not going to get into that, the genetic matters and the problems of this matter whatsoever, what invalidates, what doesn't invalidate. I want to get back to the Haftora that we're learning here. And we could say the following based upon what Professor Felix says. This symbolic act that the prophet is saying in the name of God to bring the two parts of Am Yisrael, Yehuda and Ephraim together, it could be that Hashem is telling Yechezkel, take a sapling, okay, take a young tree and engrave in it, write on it, put a sign on it or engrave in it, and take another sapling and do the grafting onto it. One is symbolic of Yehuda, the other is symbolic of Ephraim. And Professor Felix says that if we do this as described here, it could be historically the earliest grafting done in world history, because the farmers did not do this long ago, certainly not in this time. And some really argue that people didn't know about grafting in those days. But it's clear what is the objective of this prophecy from God is that when they're going to ask the prophet, what's going on here? Okay, what are you in botanic matters? What are you doing here? He's going to answer the following answer. Yehuda and Yosef will turn into one. What's the next word? What are we really talking about? We're not talking about a plank of wood. We're not talking about a luach, a board. We're talking about what's the eitz. What's the meaning to eitz according to this to this understanding, this knowledge. What is the eitz?
A nation.
Tree.
It's a tree. Instead of being two trees, through grafting, we're going to turn into one tree. The rochev that's cut off of one tree, the lower part of the tree, and grafted onto the kana. The rochev, who's riding on who? Who's the rochev? Who's the kana? Yehuda or Yosef?
Yehuda is riding on Yosef.
Yehuda is the rider, the grafter, and the kana, the base is Yosef. So who's on who? Yehuda is on Yosef.
Yeah.
So here we're talking about what we call organic unity. It's organic. It's coming by way of ourselves. It'll develop. It'll mature. It's not going to happen. Rome was not developed in one day. But when you have one grafted onto the other, you see the wounds of the tree. But those wounds will be healing, and you will no longer, after so many years, be able to discern between the rochev and the kana. It will all be really one, as if it came out of nature this way. Before we go to the summary, questions that we have here, Malta.
But it would be still similar to Rashi's approach, that is, even if it's not a nest, but it's close to a nest, because it's a very unnormal way.
Yeah, but God is teaching us to graft trees here, perhaps, and we're going to do it. It's as if all this is a symbolic action. You understand? We're not going to take this. All this is a theoretical, symbolic, but has significant meaning. That He wants us to do it. He wants us to do it. Maybe that's the big difference between Rashi's explanation. Yes, Shua.
So the way I see it, now that the Rav has presented this, is that it's more of a combination of and Rashi. We have the opportunity to do it ourselves. If we don't, Hashem will intervene and He'll do it.
Okay, but where do you see that in this prophecy? If we, according to Rashi, He has to do it. But then we see a problem. Don't we want it to come from out of our hearts, out of ourselves. We don't want to be forced to do it. Whereas here, this explanation, this botanic explanation, this agricultural explanation of grafting seems to be that we're going to be doing it. It's Am Yisrael
What
grafting.
happens if we don't do it? Then Hashem does it.
It's, I don't know, but it's a prophecy. It has to happen. It's going to happen. Sooner or later, it's going to happen. You had a question or a matter? Eliyahu?
Forgot it as of now.
Oh, no. Okay, summary. Let's summarize. This symbolic action is us. We're the ones that we have to bring ourselves closer to others. If we put aside selfishness, if we put inside to ourselves ideals of unity, of understanding, you have colors and shades and lights that I don't have, and I admire them. I realize that I'm lacking and I'm missing, and I see, I'm not going to look at things you're lacking. I mean, we all know we all have flaws. We all have things that we're lacking. What we have to do is learn from the positive points, the lights of everyone else. Okay? There's a dimension I can learn in my life from my fellow tribe, from my fellow friend. And we're not talking about stam eitz, just a piece of wood. We're talking about not a plank of wood miraculously put together by a miracle. We're talking about, and here's a play on words. We talk about grafted trees. We're talking about eitz murkav. Right, the word to graft is laharkiv. Rochev. Murkav is also complex. This is a complex situation. To bring the unity of the Jewish people at the time of the Gula, here we're not talking about that we're all alike. I don't think like you think, Ezra, and you don't think like Malti thinks, but rather we're taking two trees, we're grafting them together. One will complement the other. Your strength will help me out. His strength will help you out. We're all going to complement one another, but we have to submit ourselves. We have to be ready in our minds, in our hearts, in our souls to complement one another. And by doing so, we're going to bring greater days to the Jewish people. Bimheira v'yameinu. Amen.
Amen.
That's it. Shalom, gentlemen.